What I'm going to show you how to build next using CSS is a modal window pop-up, and this can be achieved using pure CSS and HTML. We don't have to use any JavaScript or any sort of jQuery. This is what the final page is going to look like. So I have a link, and when I click the link, you can see that the page itself kind of turns to a dimmer gray color, and then the content of the page is going to be displayed. And we have a close button here, and this goes away. And when I first click the button, this will kind of animate as it comes in. So it fades in and it kind of comes down from the top. So that's how we're going to incorporate our animation. Let's go ahead and get started building this page. I'm going to start with a blank document. So we'll begin by just making a new file. I'm going to save this in the directory that I'm working from. And I will begin by starting off with an HTML5 document. The title of my document is simply going to be Taupe Sharks. And inside of the body, I'm going to start off by making an H1, and the title is going to be Sharks in Southern California. Then I'm going to create a paragraph, and my paragraph is going to contain some text along with an A tag, and we'll just leave the href value blank for right now. I'm going to have the link be Taupe Sharks, and this is just what's going to display on the page initially. The next thing that I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'm going to make a section that is going to be my modal content. I'm going to assign an ID to this section, so we'll just call this M01 for modal 01. I'm also going to assign a class of modal to the section tag. Inside the section tag, I'm going to create an article, and my article is going to have a class of modal. The article is going to have a class of modal BG, and inside this article, I'll have a div, and this is going to have a class of modal content. And then we'll just go ahead and set up our content. So I'm going to create a header that is going to have a class of wrap, and my header is going to contain an A tag, and this A tag is going to have a class of close button, and I'll just have the link be a null link. So we're just going to make this link to a null link, and this is simply going to contain a X. That's going to be my close button. And then still inside the header, I'm going to have an H2 that is going to say Taupe Sharks. After my header closes, I'm going to create an article, and this article is going to have a class of wrap as well. And our article is just going to contain a paragraph, and inside of that paragraph I'm going to show an image. My image is going to be a picture of a taupe shark, and I'll give it an alt tag of taupe, and then I'm going to actually put 2 paragraphs in here, so we'll have this display with 2 paragraphs. And then finally, after my article closes, I'm going to make a footer. The footer is going to have a class of wrap, and inside the footer we'll simply put a paragraph, and we'll just put sharks and have a copyright symbol. And that's pretty much all we need for the HTML. So if we open this file inside of our browser, our page simply looks like this. So we need to add some CSS so that we can format this page. So let's go ahead and quickly make some CSS. I am going to link out to a CSS file. So I'm going to just add a little bit of content to my header. I'm going to add my viewport tag so that this page will act responsively. And we're also going to add a link to a CSS file, and I'll put this in a CSS folder, and I'll just call it sharks.css. I'm going to make a new file, and this is going to be my sharks.css file, so I'll save this. And I'm going to save this in my CSS folder. And now I'm ready to start with the CSS. So let's just do some basic CSS to begin with. I'm going to format the body tag, and I'm going to style my A tags just to change the default color. And let's make a rule for our wrapper, and we're just going to add some padding onto the wrappers. So these items are contained within my modal window. I'm just going to add a little bit of padding to them. Let's use 0.25 ems for the top, and we'll use 1 em for the right and the left, and the 0.25 will be on the top and the bottom. It is worth pointing out right now, if we refresh, we haven't done a ton of formatting, we're not going to actually see the modal window start to come together quite yet. But if I was to click this, it doesn't do anything because it is not linking to anything. So we'll have to hook that up eventually. But let's, before we do that, get this modal window styled. So I'm going to go ahead and make this so it kind of looks a little bit more contained and it appears as though it's in a box. So I'm going to set the background color on the header. We'll set the text color to be white. We're going to set the font size for the header information, and we're just going to up the base font size to probably 1.5 ems. And then I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit similar on the footer. We'll use that same background color, set the text color to white, and we'll go ahead and set our font size to 1.3 ems. And I'm going to give this a little bit of margin on the top. And let's use 0.5 ems for that. And as you can see, this just starts to kind of add the borders around the modal window. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to style the section. So this has a class of modal, so I'm going to target that area by just using .modal. And the things that we're going to include in this rule are going to be that we want to set the width and height to 100%. We're going to set the background color, and you'll notice I have a background color of black. That's my fallback content, and then I'm going to set the background color to a 40% black. So that's the color that I really want it to be. And I'm also going to go ahead and set its position to fixed. Top and left are going to be set to 0. My overflow is auto, and let me just disable the display none just so you can see what this is going to do to the page. So if we save this and we refresh our page, you can see what's happening. It's just going to show this kind of gray background over everything at this point because we told it to take up 100% of the width and height. And as I scroll, you can kind of see in this little section right here the original H1 and the paragraph that we had. Now this modal window isn't going to appear in this area, but this is how we're starting this. I will go back and I'll go ahead and change the display to none so that modal will just be hidden for right now. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a rule for modal BG, and modal BG is the article that's nested inside of this section tag. I'm going to tell the display of this item to be a table cell, and I'm going to tell it to have a vertical align of middle. So if we're using the table cell, then we can vertically align the information. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make a group selector. We're going to be styling the modal BG and also the modal content. So let's go back and let's make a group selector for modal BG and modal content. And we're going to set the margin of these items to auto. We're going to set the width to 85%. I'm going to go ahead and set a background color. And my background color is going to be a gray. I'm going to use AE, AE, AE. Let's throw a border on this item. So our border is going to be 1 pixel solid, and I'm going to set the color to a gray. And let's add a box shadow as well. So I think I'll actually add maybe 2 box shadows just to kind of make this have like a kind of like a shadowy glow, if you will. So the offset that I'm going to start off with is going to be 0, and then 4 pixels. We'll set the blur to 8 pixels, and I'm going to pass in 0, and then for my RGBA colors, I'm going to use a 20% black. So this is going to be the first box shadow. Let's save and take a quick look at this in the browser. Now when I refresh, I don't see anything, and that's because I still have the modal displaying as none. So I'm just going to make this display 2 so it disables it. And when I refresh, you can kind of see that there is a little bit of a drop shadow behind this item. So that is looking good. Let's go ahead and let's add a second drop shadow. So in order to add multiple drop shadows, we'll just separate these with a comma. I'll add in the new values for the next drop shadow. And I just want this to be a little bit more larger drop shadow. It's gonna be a little bit lighter as well. So I'll use an RGBA value, and instead of 20%, maybe we'll use like 15%. And let's save that and give it a look. So when I refresh, you can see that the drop shadow just becomes a little more intense and a little bit more diffused. So I'm liking the way that looks. That looks pretty nice. I'm going to set my padding on these items to 0 all the way around. And I'm going to set the outline also to 0 so I don't have any unwanted borders that some of the browsers might inject. And we'll also set our position to relative. And that should be good for these items right here. Let's make some rules for the close button. I'm going to remove the underline. I'm going to tell this to float right so it appears on the right side of the area. I'm going to make the font size pretty big. Let's use like maybe 3 M's. And let's make this font weight bold. I want this to stand out so that the user is going to know that they can click this to close the window. And we'll set the color of this to white as well. And let's go ahead and let's make a rule for the close button on hover. And probably it's a good idea just to make a focus pseudo class as well. So I'm going to use focus and hover. And we're going to set the color to be black. And let's make the cursor have a pointer. So if we go ahead and refresh our page now, you can see here's my close button, and when I hover over, it's going to be black. So that's looking pretty good as well. I'm going to size my image down a little bit. So I'm going to use IMG for my selector. You might need to adjust your selector. I'm just making all images. I don't have any other images on my page, but if you had other images, then you might want to adjust that. We're going to adjust the width to 60% and the float's going to be on the right, and I'll add some padding on the left. And since I am going to be floating this element, depending on the size of my page, you can see that the image is kind of hanging over the footer. I don't want that to happen, so I'm going to add a clear using a pseudo class of after. We'll put this on our wrap element. So the wrap element is the element that's wrapping around these things. So I'm going to do a wrap after, and I'll just put this in the same general area of my CSS to keep things tidy. So we'll use a wrap after. I'm going to clear both, have a display of block, and have the content be set to just empty quotes. And if we save now and refresh, you should see that now the footer's going to move down. So I like that. That looks pretty good. And the next thing that we're going to add to really help this to work is we're going to be using the pseudo class of :target. And this is going to go on our modal element. So I'm going to make it .modal :target. And when you use the target pseudo class, it represents a unique element, the target element. And this is going to match an ID that's going to happen somewhere in our file. So let's write the CSS and then I'll show you what I'm going to do. For the CSS, we're just going to tell this to display as a table element. And we're going to use a position of absolute. And that's it. If we go ahead and get rid of the display to so that this display none will work and save this, the next thing that we have to do is we have to tie in the HTML so this is working properly. You may recall when we made our link, we left the href value for this blank. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the href value match the ID on this section. So this is going to become #m01. And if we save this and we refresh, you can see that the modal window has disappeared, and if we click Taupe Sharks, it now appears. So now our modal window is working in the way that we want it to work. So that's looking good. I can open this and I can close this. And then our CSS animation is going to come into play because we want this to be a little smoother, to have a little bit of a fade in, and also to have kind of a little bit of movement coming down. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up some keyframes, and I'll just set up the keyframes kind of at the top of my CSS file. I'm going to use my @ keyframe syntax, and we'll just call this modal anim. And I'm going to go ahead and open my curly braces, and in my curly braces I'm going to specify what it is that I want to animate. So we're going to say from, and we'll go ahead and we'll specify that we want the top value to go ahead and maybe be set at like 150 pixels to start off with. I'm going to put a semicolon, and we'll start the opacity off at 0. So this item is going to be completely invisible, and it's going to be offset so that it's up off the top of the page, so it'll kind of bounce in a little bit. And then after our colon here, we'll say our 2. And for 2, we're going to specify that the top value be set to 0 pixels. And the opacity, we want it to be at full opacity, so we'll set that at 1. So we've set up the keyframes and assigned the keyframes a name. Now we need to go ahead and we need to call this in. So we're going to put the call to those keyframes under our group selector for modal BG and modal content. Those are the things that we're going to want to animate. So down here I'm going to say animation name, and this is going to be modal anim, which is the name that we just assigned. We're going to set the animation duration, and the animation duration is going to be 2 seconds, so we can really see this happening. And if we actually play this animation now, it should work. So if I refresh the page and I click this, you can see how it kind of appears, and then this is going to roll down. So it's a little static right now, like there's kind of like a little bit of a delay. You can see the window grays out, and then this kind of rolls in. What I'd really like to happen is to have this have a little bit more interesting feel. So I'm going to add animation timing function, which we looked at some of our previous exercises. And we'll go ahead and use our cubic Bezier so we can really customize this. And inside of the parentheses, I'm going to use 0.215 for the first value, 0.6 for the second value, 0.35 for the third value, and 1 for the fourth value. And to get those values, I just kind of played around and found something that felt right to me. So I liked the feel of those. If we go back now and refresh again, and we go ahead and play this, you can see how now this kind of slides in, and it's a little bit of a smoother slide. It kind of slides in and rolls into place. So I like the feel of that much more. I think that that works way better than it did before, both with the animation and with the movement. And that's really all I need to do. Now I have this really nice little modal window that kind of comes into play. I like the way this is looking. It's pure CSS. We don't need any sort of JavaScript. And obviously all of these settings are completely customizable depending on what you do. It is worth noting that this page is completely responsive as well. So if I go ahead and resize the page, you can see that everything is going to work in a responsive fashion, which is awesome. So, yep, pure CSS, modal window. Hope you like it.